In the stone-walled palaces of the Middle Ages, thrones were built upon the broken destinies of children. In this world, before her 13th birthday, one small girl would become both a queen and a prisoner. The story of Isabella of France, the she-wolf, was beginning. Her life exposed the darkness behind the glittering crowns of fairy tales, for she was not a bride, but a silent hostage in the war between two empires. The year was 1308. A diplomatic wedding was being arranged between France and England, but this was no love story. It was a theater of power and calculation. The bride was a young French princess, still a child. The groom, King Edward II of England, was 24, a man whose heart belonged not to his wife, but to his favorite, Piers Gaveston. On her wedding day, Isabella wore a gown woven with golden threads and trimmed with fur. It was so heavy she needed 2 maids to help her walk. The scene itself was a symbol of the age. A child crushed beneath the weight of power, burdened by responsibilities she could not yet understand. The corridors of Westminster Abbey echoed with Latin prayers she could not comprehend, while every gaze was fixed upon her. When the golden crown was placed on her head, its weight bent her neck, as if fate itself had already sealed her destiny. Bells rang through the streets of London, celebrating the new queen, but for Isabella, it marked the beginning of life inside a gilded cage. The jewel of France had become England's possession. She was still a child, yet expected to bear heirs for a kingdom she did not know. Her toys, her laughter, her childhood, all left behind, replaced by protocol, prayer, and fear. The wedding night was brief, yet it marked the beginning of a lifelong solitude. Isabella, a child expected to bear a woman's burdens, found herself utterly alone. Her French attendants were sent away. No one around her spoke her language. The palace, for all its splendor, was cold and foreign. Neglected by her husband, the young queen had become nothing more than a political pawn, a crowned captive. In those days, royal marriages were acts of war by other means. Love, loyalty, or happiness had no value. Children were exchanged like property for land, alliances, and power. Isabella's fate had been decided before she was even born. To her father, King Philip IV of France, she was not a daughter but a diplomatic weapon. Her marriage to the English king was the cornerstone of a fragile peace between the two realms. For years, French and English envoys debated every detail from her dowry to territorial rights, while Isabella's name appeared in diplomatic documents as though she were a commodity. No one asked what she wanted or how she felt. For her father, this marriage was a victory, one without bloodshed. The marriage contract revealed the cruelty of medieval law. Isabella was forbidden from corresponding with her family without royal approval, forbidden from leaving England without permission, and required to undergo regular virginity inspections until the marriage was consummated. Even her body belonged to the crown. Edward II's inclinations were well known in France. His infatuation with Piers Gaveston was the scandal whispered through the courts of Europe. Philip knew it too, yet he willingly sacrificed his daughter to the match for political gain. After the wedding, Isabella was torn from the safety of the French court and cast into the harsh winds of England. Her education had been carefully tailored to prepare her for queenship, English customs, noble lineages, ceremonial etiquette, but no one had taught her how to survive isolation. Westminster Palace, her new home, became not a sanctuary but a prison gilded in gold. Every movement, every word, was monitored. Her mornings began with prayers. Her meals were served at fixed times. Her reading limited to approved texts. Every letter she wrote was censored. Every message to her family was intercepted by royal spies. Even her ladies-in-waiting were not companions, but informants. The little girl from France had become England's silent prisoner. Barely 13 years old, she was already growing up in the shadow of power, the first page in a story written countless times throughout history, where women bore the weight of kingdoms while losing the right to their own lives. Isabella was no longer just a child. She had grown into a queen, whose crown no longer fit her soul. The crown was not a reward, but a chain, and the moment it touched her head, it imprisoned her spirit. The royal apartments assigned to her in Westminster Palace were less a home than a silent prison. The corridors were lined with guards. The windows seemed to open to the outside world, but in truth, they led nowhere. Isabella could not walk in the gardens, could not visit the kitchens, could not speak to anyone from her homeland without permission. Wherever she stepped, eyes followed her, a child prisoner, a captive wrapped in silk. Her relationship with Edward II was not a marriage, but a cold alliance. The king, blinded by his infatuation with Piers Gaveston, treated his wife as nothing more than a political necessity. He could go days, even weeks, without speaking to her directly, communicating only through messengers, ignoring her, even when she was in the same room. That emotional absence slowly hollowed Isabella from within. Those around her spoke of how the once lively and intelligent French princess had become withdrawn and silent. She bit her nails until they bled, tore at her hair, and flinched at sudden noises. In the body of a small girl, she carried the loneliness of a queen. Even the dining table became a battlefield. Lavish royal banquets were laid before her, yet she often left them untouched, not from lack of appetite, but because every bite, every sip, could be twisted into political gossip. She learned to hide her hunger as she hid her longing, preserving her dignity while slowly starving in body and spirit. Isabella's early years as queen were overshadowed by one of England's greatest scandals, King Edward's consuming passion for the Gascon knight Piers Gaveston. This was not a rumor, but an open secret, whispered through every court in Europe. Gaveston had been Edward's childhood companion. Upon taking the throne, the king immediately named him Earl of Cornwall. Handsome, clever, and arrogantly ambitious, Gaveston used his influence to amass wealth and power, showing open contempt for England's nobles. They despised him, but few dared to speak against the king's favorite. His behavior toward Isabella was cruel and mocking. He called her the French witch, ridiculed her accent, and laughed at her manners. The greatest humiliation came at her coronation banquet, when Gaveston appeared wearing jewels meant for the queen. The ruby necklace crafted as her wedding gift now gleamed around his neck. Isabella was forced to sit silently, watching another man flaunt her own jewels before the entire court. Gaveston soon became more than a courtier. He was the true center of power. At official ceremonies, he sat at the king's right hand, the place traditionally reserved for the queen. Foreign ambassadors greeted him before acknowledging Isabella, who was reduced to a ceremonial afterthought. The intimacy between Edward and Gaveston could no longer be concealed. Witnesses described them sleeping in the same chambers, exchanging lavish gifts, and showing affection that scandalized even the tolerant medieval court. For Isabella, watching her husband lavish affection on another man was daily torment. The humiliation she endured in silence. News of her suffering reached France. Her father, King Philip IV, enraged by the reports, sent letters to his son-in-law demanding that Isabella be treated with respect, even threatening to withdraw French support if her situation did not improve. But this only angered Edward further, making her life even harder. Yet those years of humiliation taught Isabella an enduring truth. Power is not gained through forgiveness, but through memory. She quietly etched every insult, every betrayal into her mind. The girl who once appeared as a victim would, in time, rise as a woman capable of toppling kings. The she-wolf of France. Isabella's story lays bare the brutal reality of medieval child marriage, a system that exalted politics and crushed humanity. Canon law required consent for marriage, but for children, that consent was given by their parents, not by them. A child's will, fear, or feelings meant nothing. Isabella's union was a perfect example of this cruelty. The completion of marriage, its physical consummation, was a formal event, verified by physicians and sanctioned by the church. When Isabella reached 15, she was deemed ready to fulfill her duty. For 3 years, she was subjected to routine virginity examinations. What we recognize today as systematic abuse was then regarded as royal necessity. Court physicians, eager to hasten her physical maturity, prescribed herbal tonics, rigid diets, and dangerous regimens. Her body was not seen as her own. It was a political instrument, inspected under the eyes of doctors and courtiers alike. Privacy did not exist for a queen. Even her pregnancies were matters of state. Astrologers chose the auspicious times for conception. Priests blessed them, and physicians dictated every aspect of her regimen. The birth of a child was not the joy of a mother, it was the destiny of a nation. By the time she was still little more than a girl, Isabella's body and soul no longer belonged to her. She was no longer human in the eyes of those who ruled her life. She was living policy, a breathing treaty between kingdoms. During these years, Isabella's household was designed not to provide comfort to a queen, but to enforce political control. Everyone around her had been chosen for obedience rather than loyalty. Her English ladies-in-waiting were not selected to offer companionship to the young queen, but were daughters of families loyal to Edward II. One by one, Her French attendants were dismissed, severing the last ties to her native language and culture. Everyone in her orbit now had one task: to watch, to report, and to control. This deliberate isolation left wounds that no age could heal. In an era without any concept of childhood trauma or mental illness, Isabella's distress was not understood, but her silence was seen as weakness, her despair as female melancholy, her tears were called sin, her breathless anxiety a sign of insufficient piety. Yet what Isabella endured was systematic psychological imprisonment, though no one of her age had the words to name it. When Isabella turned 17, she became pregnant for the first time, a moment that changed not just her life but the destiny of the English crown. She was no longer a decorative queen. She was now the vessel of a dynasty. The child she carried was measured not by her body, but by its political worth. Her pregnancy ceased to be personal. It became a matter of state. Until the 4th month, it was kept secret, for the birth of a royal heir could alter the balance of power across Europe. Medieval medicine, laced with superstition, turned her pregnancy into a kind of strategic campaign. Every bite she ate, every walk she took, was planned to increase the chances of bearing a son. Certain foods were forbidden, specific herbal concoctions were prescribed. Her well-being was irrelevant. Only the child's gender mattered. When Edward III was born in 1312, all England exhaled in relief. Isabella had fulfilled her duty, but the triumph was short. She was no longer seen as a mother, but as a breeder of heirs. Even days after giving birth, courtiers were already asking, when will there be a second boy? The bond between mother and son was crushed under the cold machinery of royal protocol. Royal children were raised by appointed nurses and tutors, not their parents. Isabella saw her son only at formal ceremonies from a distance, under watchful eyes. The separation was intentional, justified as a safeguard against emotional weakness. Throughout her fertile years, Isabella lived under relentless surveillance. Court physicians recorded her menstrual cycles, mixed fertility potions, and consulted astrologers to determine the proper time for conception. Each miscarriage brought not only sorrow but political blame. To fail to bear a child was not a tragedy, it was treason against expectation. This combination of medical intrusion and political coercion slowly consumed her. She was expected to be both queen and mother, yet never truly human. In public, she had to display maternal warmth, but in private, treat her children as diplomatic pawns. When her infant daughter Joan was betrothed to a Scottish prince, Isabella was required to smile for the court, for any display of emotion was deemed weakness. Yet within, she mourned another child lost to politics. After Piers Gaveston's execution at the hands of rebellious nobles, the king found a new favorite, Hugh Despenser the Younger, a man far more cunning and dangerous than his predecessor. His rise would come to be known by chroniclers as the Despenser tyranny. England was no longer ruled by its king but by his shadow. Despenser's ambitions went beyond wealth. He wanted absolute power. Using his hold over Edward, he banished rivals, confiscated estates, and reshaped every royal decree for his own gain. His treatment of Isabella was calculated. Isolate her, strip her of allies, and reduce her to irrelevance. Edward II ceased to rule in any meaningful sense. Every appointment, military decision, and diplomatic order passed through Despenser's hands. Isabella's name still appeared in royal documents, but her voice had been silenced. Despenser's persecution went beyond politics. It became personal. Isabella's French relatives and advisors were dismissed, exiled, or arrested on fabricated charges. The intent was clear: to leave her utterly defenseless, desperate. Isabella tried to send secret letters to her family in France, but they were intercepted. Despenser used them as proof of treasonous correspondence. The king, blind to manipulation, even accused his wife of espionage. From that moment, every move Isabella made was monitored, every word recorded. She could no longer breathe freely without permission. The breaking point came when, at Despenser's urging, the king confiscated Isabella's personal estates, her only source of income and independence. With her lands seized, the queen became entirely dependent on her enemies' mercy. Chroniclers of the time describe a visible transformation. The once radiant and poised queen appeared pale, thin, and hollow. The light in her face had faded. Her gowns, however magnificent, could not disguise her decline. That quiet exhaustion etched into her face was more than personal grief. It mirrored the decay of an entire kingdom. The most powerful woman in England had become a ghost within her own palace. A queen in name, but a prisoner in truth. Isabella had begun to display strange behaviors that worried the court observers. She washed her hands compulsively, recoiled when someone came too close, and flinched at the slightest touch. Years of fear and oppression had driven her to the edge of both physical and mental collapse. By 1325, her long-awaited chance for freedom appeared, hidden beneath the guise of a diplomatic mission. Her brother, King Charles IV of France, was threatening war over disputes in Gascony, and Edward II desperately needed a trusted envoy to negotiate peace. Isabella, using her French birth and royal connections, presented herself as the ideal candidate. What seemed like a simple act of duty would become the turning point of her entire life. The preparation for the mission revealed how skillfully Isabella had learned to manipulate the men who sought to control her. She framed her request not as a plea for independence, but as an act of loyalty and sacrifice. She expressed sorrow at leaving her children, fear of travel, and concern for her husband's well-being, transforming her escape into a performance of devotion. Despenser, sensing the potential danger of her freedom, opposed the idea at first, but diplomatic pressure and Edward's own helplessness finally persuaded him to consent. Every aspect of the journey was tightly controlled. The servants accompanying her were chosen by Despenser. Her instructions were written by the Royal Council, and her every move in France was to be tracked by English agents. On paper, it was a mission of peace in truth, a form of freedom bound in chains. When Isabella arrived in Paris in March 1325, she was beyond English surveillance for the first time in 17 years. The psychological transformation was immediate. Within days, the color returned to her cheeks, her voice grew steady, her posture straightened. The French court received her with both sympathy and caution. King Charles IV and Queen Jean understood that Isabella was not just a political envoy, but a deeply wounded woman reclaiming her strength. Gradually, Isabella shifted from a diplomatic representative to an independent political force. Returning to England would mean returning to Despenser's prison, so her letters grew cautious, yet increasingly defiant. Her reports began to criticize English policy, and her conduct no longer conformed to London's expectations. During this time, she met the exiled English nobleman Roger Mortimer. Their relationship was more than romantic. It was a strategic alliance between two victims of Despenser's tyranny. Isabella brought royal legitimacy and access to French support. Mortimer brought military skill, pragmatism, and fierce determination. What began as an alliance of necessity soon deepened into mutual respect and emotional partnership. For Mortimer, Isabella was an intelligent, powerful woman. For Isabella, he was the first man to treat her as an equal. The preparations for their return to England took nearly a year. Using her status as queen, Isabella negotiated with Flemish merchants, German mercenaries, and French nobles, assembling a coalition united by hatred of Despenser's regime. She was no longer merely surviving, she was orchestrating. Her propaganda campaign before the invasion was masterful. She portrayed herself not as a rebellious wife, but as a mother defending her son's rightful crown. That narrative transformed treason into duty and won her both noble and popular support. In September 1326, Isabella landed on the Suffolk coast with about 1,500 men, a small army, but one bound by loyalty and vengeance. Among them were exiled nobles, mercenaries, and commoners united by their hatred of Despenser. Isabella had learned from past uprisings. Success required not just swords, but hearts. Edward II, true to form, responded with confusion and cowardice. Rather than organize resistance, he fled westward with Despenser, abandoning London to Isabella's advancing forces. The capital fell almost without a fight, a testament to how completely Edward's authority had rotted away. In November 1326, Hugh Despenser was captured and executed. That moment marked the full transformation of Isabella, from silent victim to the cold embodiment of vengeance. She, who had once been powerless under his cruelty, now decided his fate. Despenser's death was brutal, drawn out, and symbolic. The Queen's retribution made flesh. Isabella of France was no longer merely a queen. She had become a legend, the she-wolf of France, a woman forged in betrayal, who learned to strike back with regal precision and merciless resolve. Despenser's trial appeared, on the surface, to follow proper legal procedure, but its outcome was predetermined. It was not justice, it was a ritual of vengeance, orchestrated by Isabella to avenge years of humiliation. The official charges listed treason, tyranny, and corruption of royal authority. Yet everyone knew his true crime was far more personal: the systematic destruction of Isabella's life. Chroniclers wrote that the Queen personally oversaw the proceedings, ensuring that every accusation was read aloud in public, and that no detail of his cruelty was left unspoken. The execution mirrored the very torments Despenser had inflicted on others. He was sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, the traditional punishment for traitors. But Isabella ordered that the process be prolonged as much as possible. At her command, the executioners extended each stage to maximize his suffering. The Queen watched from a special platform, her face motionless, her gaze cold and unyielding. As Despenser's screams echoed through the square, they seemed to reverberate against the same walls that had once echoed with his laughter. Edward II's fate was more complicated. As both the Queen's husband and the rightful monarch, his execution would have been politically disastrous, yet he could no longer remain on the throne. The solution was a forced abdication disguised as a voluntary act. His 14-year-old son was proclaimed Edward III, with Isabella and Roger Mortimer serving as regents. The ceremony at Kenilworth Castle in January 1327 appeared to preserve the king's dignity, but in truth, it stripped him of all remaining honor. Isabella observed the event with the same expressionless calm she had shown at Despenser's death. The man who had once ignored her at court now knelt before her government, surrendering the crown he had never learned to rule. Soon after, Edward II was sent to Berkeley Castle. Official reports claimed he was in good health, but in reality, he was kept in strict isolation, cut off from the outside world. That September, news came that he had died of natural causes. Few believed it. Many suspected murder. Whether the order came directly from Isabella or merely occurred under her silent consent remains uncertain. But his death solidified her power beyond challenge. From 1327 to 1330, Isabella ruled at the height of her influence. Together with Mortimer, she governed England in all but name. Decisions were made, not by royal seal, but by her word. This was the era that earned her the title, the She-Wolf of France. Once treated as a decorative figure, she now commanded armies and dictated policy. The early years of her regency were marked by success. She ended the ruinous Scottish wars, secured peace treaties, and restored financial stability. These achievements proved that Isabella was not merely a vengeful woman, but a capable and pragmatic ruler. Her demeanor changed as well. She walked tall, her voice firm with authority. Her clothing was rich, yet functional, designed for command, not ornament. No longer a passive queen, she was the true power behind the throne. Her relationship with Mortimer was no secret. They traveled together, appeared side by side at public ceremonies, and made little effort to hide their closeness. To moralists, it was scandalous. But Isabella no longer cared for the first time in her life. She was free and in control, but absolute power never lasts. As Edward III approached adulthood, resentment grew among the nobles, who feared Mortimer's dominance and whispered that the young king should rule in his own right. Encouraged by these allies, Edward struck swiftly. In October 1330, he staged a coup at Nottingham Castle. Mortimer was arrested. Power shifted overnight. Awakened in the night to the sounds of soldiers storming the corridors, Isabella found herself surrounded by her son's men. The woman who had once overthrown a king for her son's sake now faced that same son's judgment. When Mortimer was sentenced to death, she fell to her knees and begged for mercy. Edward's response was cold and final. Mortimer would die as a traitor. Isabella, as Queen Mother and daughter of France, would be spared, but she would never again hold power. She spent the next 30 years in quiet confinement at Castle Rising in Norfolk. Though under supervision, she lived comfortably on a royal pension, devoting her time to prayer and charity. Over time, the name She-Wolf of France faded into history, replaced by the image of a silent widow. Edward III visited her occasionally, showing respect but maintaining emotional distance. She was no longer part of governance, merely a living relic of turbulent years. When she died, her funeral was modest and dignified. Isabella's life was that of a child sacrificed to politics, a betrayed wife, and a woman who seized her destiny to bring a kingdom to its knees. She reached the summit of power, only to vanish, at last, into the quiet shadows of history. The legacy of Queen Isabella of France is a mirror woven with the contradictions of her age. Medieval chroniclers, in retelling her story, often inscribed their own biases into the record. Some praised her as a mother who protected her son. Others damned her as a wicked woman for defying her husband. Isabella lived in a world where queens were expected to be obedient wives and silent ornaments of power, and by breaking those boundaries, she became an unsettling anomaly. Her very existence was a challenge to a history written by and for men. Modern historians view her through a more human lens. Isabella was both a victim of a system and a survivor who learned to turn that system into her weapon. Married off at 12 as a political pawn, humiliated, and surveilled for decades, she ultimately transformed herself into one of the most powerful figures of her time. When she died in 1358, at the age of 63, she was no longer feared, yet neither was she forgotten. Her funeral was modest but dignified. She was buried in London's Greyfriars Church, wearing the same wedding gown she had donned as a terrified child bride half a century earlier. It was a fitting irony. In death, she returned to the image from which her story began, not as a queen, but as a girl. Isabella's story is not merely that of a woman's struggle for power. It is a reflection of how medieval monarchy shaped, used, and often destroyed the human soul. From being declared the property of the state in childhood, to having her body monitored for political gain, to seeing even motherhood turned into a national duty, every stage of her life revealed the machinery that eroded her humanity. Within that machinery, Isabella was both forged and broken, hardened enough to seize control of the very gears that had once crushed her. She remains one of history's most unsettling female figures, precisely because she cannot be confined to a single role. She was neither purely innocent nor entirely cruel, neither only victim nor only villain. Isabella was both the silenced child and the woman who turned her rage into power. Her life was a living laboratory of how authority transforms and corrupts the human spirit. England's forgotten queen was never truly forgotten, because she embodies the eternal human story that lies between power and morality, love and vengeance, femininity and authority. Hers is the tragedy of a soul born powerless, ascending to power, and ultimately devoured by it. Isabella endures as the echo of every woman suppressed, every voice forced into silence. Her story is not a relic of the past, it is a mirror for the present. It still compels us to ask, when does power become freedom? And when does freedom become another kind of captivity?